Also think that Rabbi Halevy wrote it. Everyone has a different understanding who wrote this book. We know he was a Rishon, that's from the early rabbis. We also know that he was mostly following in the style of the Rambam. So he was from the camp of the Rambam. That's who he comes from. The Sefer HaChinuch is like a classic. It's basically goes through the parashiyot, not all the parashas, and it takes every one of the mitzvot in that week's parsha. And it tells you a few things. The first one is, what is the mitzvah? Do this. It explains to you what is the mitzvah, 1. 2, what are the boundaries of the mitzvah? Meaning, who does it apply to? Does it apply to men? Does it apply to women? Does it apply to servants? Does it apply to slaves? To Jews? To non-Jews? Who does it apply to? And also, where does it apply? Inside of Israel? Outside of Israel? In the Beit HaMikdash? Outside of the Beit HaMikdash? And 4th, does it apply when the Jewish people have a temple? And does it apply when we don't have a temple? So essentially, it takes every mitzvah and breaks it down into categories. Then there's a commentary called the Minchat Chinuch, and this is a commentary on this book, the Chinuch. This they don't have in English, to the best of my knowledge, but this in the yeshiva they learn a lot. And he's the one who he explains more. Like the Shulchan Aruch says this, and this is the one says that. And he basically brings the more current books that we didn't have when they were writing the Sefer HaChinuch. I don't know. So there are 2 mitzvot that are pretty much connected to each other. And the first mitzvah is mitzvah Samach Gimel. Shelo lehonot hager bedvarim. And this is to not stress, don't cause distress to a convert with words. And this mitzvah is very much connected to the mitzvah number 65, which if you look at it, Shelo la'anot yatom v'almana, not to distress a widow. C63? Is not to distress, how do they translate it?
Yeah, not to verbally oppress a convert to Judaism.
Okay, now then if you look at mitzvah 65, it says not to verbally oppress.
Oh. Okay. Not to afflict any orphan or widow.
Oh, very nice. So you see from here that there's afflicting a widow and orphan, and you see from here that there's afflicting a convert. And so I want to do the mitzvah of afflicting a widow and orphan because that's more, it happens more often. Good evening. And we have to start though with the first one because we have the basis here. So let's see the first thing. The Torah tells us, we're obliged, you cannot cause distress to a convert even with words. What does it mean, a convert? Sometimes in Torah when it says convert, a ger, what does it really mean?
Foreigner?
A foreigner, not necessarily a Jew, but somebody who's not Jewish, who lives in the land of Israel, uses the word ger. Like the Torah says, there's a word for it, sojourner.
Sojourner,
Yeah? It says, Ki gerim haytem eretz Mitzrayim. You were also strangers once upon a time in a land that wasn't your land. Interestingly enough, I taught the ladies on Monday, the Kehillat says that this mitzvah specifically applies to not just the converts, not just the travelers that are not Jewish. He said the Jewish travelers that come from a different kind of culture than you come from. And he writes in the Kehillat, if you look in letter Gimel, under Gerim, he says when Ashkenazim go to the Sfaradim, and the Sfaradim go to the Ashkenazim. And he says something that's 250 years ago, about. And the Kehillat says, how could it be that we say, the Ashkenazim, they should go get help from the Ashkenazim. The Sfaradim should go to the Sfaradim. And he writes, as if we are 2 separate people, God forbid. He says, this is the most degrading thing that we can do to Hashem. At the end of the day, this person is Jewish. They're part of our people. So who cares where they come from? The person says, this has to be fixed, this problem. It's amazing to me this was a problem they dealt with so long ago. And it's still a problem that we deal with today. And it's a problem that has to be fixed. It must be fixed. And so we have a commandment on more pshat, on the basic level, not to oppress the person who's a convert. And he's going to explain here. Vu echad min ha'omot shenitgayer is a person from one of the nations of the world. Shenitgayer, he converted. V'nichnas b'dateinu, he's entered our faith. She'asur lanu levazoto afilu b'dvarim. We cannot degrade him with words. Shneimar v'ger lo toneh. You cannot distress or oppress a ger. So obviously we have this mitzvah to every Jew. What's the question here? So he's the convert, so now you're allowed to do it? No. So what's we can't do this to anybody. So what's so special here about this mitzvah? Why is the Torah adding one of the 613 as specifically a convert?
To make sure that you don't be, I don't know, like racial discrimination or...
This is a big problem. What Barry's saying is a big problem. There are places where someone who converts to Judaism, we consider him a Jew, everything is, there's nothing different about him than any other Jew. The Rambam has the famous letter to a man named Ovadia Hager. He calls him Harav Ovadia Hager. It wasn't a rabbi, but he gave him a letter of respect. And Ovadia Hager asked a very simple question. He said, can I make the blessing in the morning? Shalom Asani Goy. Hashem, thank you for not creating me a non-Jew. So at the end of the day, Hashem created me a non-Jew. I became Jewish, but I was created non-Jewish.
Right.
He said, and can I say, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu? I can say, my God, but can I say the God of my fathers? My father's alive and he doesn't believe in you. Can I say this blessing?
Wow.
But now his father is our
Smart gear.
So this is here what Moshe Chaim said?
Yeah.
The Rambam writes a beautiful letter. He goes out of his way. The Rambam normally writes very short, long letter. I have it in English. I have it in English over here. One second. The Rambam writes as Rabbi Ovadia Hager, and he tells him the following. He says, you are a Jew like I am a Jew. He says, do you want to know who your father is? He says, your father is Abraham Avinu. He's Abraham, our father. Because you chose to become part of his family. And you chose, and that means that your lineage, your spiritual lineage is like my spiritual lineage. He said, it's even greater than perhaps other people's spiritual lineage. He said, and therefore you have to, not only are you allowed to, but you must. You must say Elokeinu v'Elohei Avotenu. And of course, you Shalom Asani Goy, you say because you today have made yourself into who you really were always meant to be. And the Rambam writes such beautiful words to this person, like words of strength and encouragement. And this is an attitude that, unfortunately, has very much dwindled into not a good place today.
It's the opposite, because when I grew up and people were converted, they would say, but you're not recognized in Israel.
Right. What does that make a person feel like?
Yeah.
Somebody came to Rabbi,
Yeah.
said, I'm just convert. No, you like myself. There's no difference between you and me.
Very nice. I'm going to tell you that in this later generations, normally I speak about the good of this crowd. Sometimes I always talk about Ashkenazim. It seems like the Sfaradim here are in the wrong about their approach to the converts. There are groups of Sfaradim, for example, the Syrian community. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, when he first moved to Yerushalayim, he got rid of a certain rule that existed in Yerushalayim. There was a rabbi called the Kehillat, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulay, and he made a excommunication, a ban. Anybody who was 20 and single was not allowed to live inside of Jerusalem, and in the walls of Jerusalem. And that was a law that was accepted in the Jewish community. That if you're 20 and single, they moved you out of Jerusalem.
Guys or girls?
That might not be a bad idea to bring it back.
And so because there was a halakha that you should get married when you're 18, if not 18, at least by 20. By 20, so you're in a place where you have to be married to live in this holy of a place. That was his approach. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef didn't like this rule. And even though he was 350 years later, the first thing Rabbi Ovadia Yosef did in Jerusalem was get rid of this law. And he caused a lot of controversy. It's kind of like if someone today... How can I say? Imagine if somebody today... No, it's okay. The halakha, for example, is that you're allowed to marry two women. You know, it's such a halakha. It never ends up well in Jewish tradition. You look in the Bible, whenever we have someone married to 2 ladies, 3 ladies, it always ends up in disaster. But halachically, it's allowed to happen. There was an Ashkenazi rabbi named Rabbi Gershom, about 1,000 some years ago, and he put a ban. Jews, even though you're allowed to, we're not allowed to marry 2 ladies. And that's the halakha in Judaism. We don't marry 2 ladies. Now,
Gershom was for Ashkenazi.
for Ashkenazi. Today, this is the accepted standard in most places.
And for Sephardim, I listened that it was in the 60s or something.
Right, again, the state of Israel, they took it upon themselves. But it's because it's against the law to be married to 2 people, not because it's against halakha.
I understand if somebody comes to the country, this country, they have 2 wives, they don't bother him. But come here and marry 2nd wife, they won't allow it.
Interesting. So I don't know the laws, like the legal laws in this country, but the interesting thing here is imagine if a rabbi would come today and say, I'm getting rid of this rule. Imagine the controversy that would surround such a character. Rabbi Yosef starts his rabbinic career by getting rid of one of the oldest laws in Jerusalem. He throws it out the window. He says, they should learn. If they have a good reason not to be married, let them stay in Jerusalem. And he always said, if I could get rid of the Syrian custom also on converts, I would do it also. He said, but they won't listen to me, so why should I do it? The Syrians have their own little unique Jewish community. It's very special. It's a special Jewish community, but has very much kept itself isolated from the rest of the Jewish community, including other Sfaradim.
A big community in
They have
Israel.
a very big community in Israel and in New York, especially in
I
New
know
York.
the New York place.
They have a chief rabbi who sits in New York. He's the chief rabbi of the Syrian community. And they have a law in their community, it's about 100 years old, that even if you convert into Orthodox conversion, they will not count this person as a minyan. They will not take his kids to school. They do not accept converts in their community.
Ah,
That's rough.
About 4 years ago, the rabbis were thinking of taking it back. They had like an 80-year cap on it. And the rabbis, like 100 Syrian rabbis from around the world, signed on it for another 80 years.
already.
Yeah, and there is a reason for that, because in Masechet Kedushin there is a bunch of controversial things, like Mamzer can marry Geret, but cannot marry normal Israeli woman. And
So what does that have to do with
there's
banning?
several- So the status of the ger is not same as a regular Israeli.
You're interesting because you're choosing to go from that direction. I'll tell you what their logic is. Their rationale is as follows. That's what they say. They have two problems. And the first problem was the Syrian community always was very wealthy. Very wealthy. And very often people were converting to get into the club, so to speak. If we convert. No, they say that story about the guy, Mr. O'Brien. There's a Jewish country club. He always wanted to be part of this Jewish country club. And they would never let him in because he wasn't Jewish. So finally, he put some money down, bribed the right people, they let him inside. But the manager said, listen, you can't, it's only Jews are allowed in this country club. You can't go around and tell people your name is O'Brien. It's like, you got to tell them your name is Goldberg, Mr. Goldberg. He said, okay. He said, if they ask you what you do, tell them that you sell shmatas, you sell clothing. If they say, what kind of clothing? Tell them that you sell talitot, you sell talits. He said, okay, wonderful. So he goes into this place and someone says, oh, how are you? What's your name? He says, I'm Mr. Goldberg. He says, actually, you don't look like a Goldberg. He says, no, but my name is Mr. Goldberg. He said, yeah, and what are you working? He said, I sell shmatas. He said, what kind of shmatas? He said, oh, I sell the talit, the talit. I said, that's so interesting. My whole life, I was always wondering what it says on the neck of the talit. It has these Hebrew words. I don't know what it says. He says, maybe you could help me. This is your trade. You surely must know what it says. Can you help me out? He says, oh, I would love to help you out, but I only sell the sleeves. You should use this when you sell a talit next time. He says he only sells the sleeves of the talit. So that's good. Sometimes you could push someone up. People were trying to get in for the wrong reason. So the rabbi said, listen, we're just not taking people in. There was a similar period in the time of King David. In the time of King David, the Jewish kingdom was doing very well. It's one enough people, in the middle of the Holocaust, weren't knocking on our door to convert. It was specifically when times were doing well that you had people who were coming in. And King David said, I'm banning the acceptance of converts. Now, Jews still converted people in that time. Just not under the authority of the central, imagine like the central rabbinate. They just said they were small, renegade courts of this thing. And they were considered Jewish. You cannot say that someone's not Jewish. No one has the authority to do that. What you can say is that they're not willing to convert anybody. And so this Syrian community adopted the same approach that people are converting to us for the wrong reasons, we don't want to do it. The Syrian community had a second problem. And the second problem was that their boys were going off to college, university, they were doing all kinds of things. And they were not coming back with Jewish girls. And they knew that their dad was a wealthy guy with enough money, he could pay the right rabbi and he'll make his girlfriend from college Jewish. And they saw this happening to the Reform community and the conservative communities and even the Orthodox communities around them. And so they made a rule. You should know that if you go to college and you meet some non-Jewish girl, she will never be accepted in our community. And by them, the community, it's a very big social, it's a pressure. I don't know that most Jews are ever familiar with such a It's one community. There's one chief rabbi. There's one central synagogue. It's not like the way the rest of the Jewish community operates. Like, oh, I don't like this rabbi, I'll get my own. It doesn't work that way. There's one everything. And so if you're not accepted in that one everything, so you pretty much are an outcast. And so what this did for them was kept their children marrying Jewish because they knew there was no other option. Rabbi Yosef said, I still don't buy it. So there are 36 times in the Torah it says that you have to love the convert. 36. How many times says you don't eat meat and milk?
36 times in Shaar or in the Torah?
In the Torah.
Wow.
How many times does it say you have to keep kosher, not mix meat and milk?
Three.
3 times,
Three
yeah?
times, 3 times.
Keeping Shabbat? Twice.
6.
Shamor and Zechor. And loving the convert? 36 times.
Wow.
Says Rav Avadi, your priorities are thrown off. We have a commandment that somebody who converts to Jewish people is like a Jew, and you have to love him 36 times more than somebody else. And so he fought this campaign with this, everything that he had, he fought. It wasn't successful. He was the biggest Sephardic rabbi in the world, and this community said, we'll listen to you about everything except for this. And that's how you know they're really Jewish, because they are stubborn. And so he says here something very interesting. He says, וזה כיוון שנכנס בדתנו הרי הוא כישראל, הוסיף התורה לנו אזהרה בו. Because he's now joined the Jewish people, so Hashem is adding another prohibition that one has to, not to oppress him. וגם נכפלה אזהרה עליו דכתיב, לא תונו אותו. It says another time in the book of Vayikra, now we're in Shemot, it says in Vayikra, that you also can oppress him. פעם אחרת, the second time. Why a second time? לפי שעניין ההונאה אליו קרובה יותר מבישראל. It's much easier for a convert to get offended or hurt by us than another Jew. And listen to what he says. And this is the beauty of the Sefer HaChinuch. See, when we read the Torah, it says, don't do this, do this, don't do this, do this. The Sefer HaChinuch almost always tries to get into the logic behind it. Why? How? What's the idea behind it? And he says, כישראל יש לו גואלים שטובים אל בנו. He says, the Jews, we have a support system built in. So something someone you at shul, you have parents, you have brothers, you have sisters, you have a rabbi that you were close with in high school. He said, but this person, who does he have? He joined the Jewish community alone. And so if someone says the wrong thing to him, someone makes fun of him, someone hurts him, it's not like he can go back to his friends, oh, you know that guy at the shul wasn't. He has nobody. He's alone. The Torah says twice you have to go out of your way to make sure you don't do something wrong to him. There's another reason. This can very often happen that somebody will go back to their previous religion because we weren't treating them properly here. He said, and that's our fault. Because the halakha is that a Jew, someone not Jewish, who converts to Judaism and goes back, is he Jewish or not Jewish?
Jewish.
Of course he's Jewish. He's like any other Jew who joined his church. And that will be our fault. And says the Michat Chinuch, you have to be, the Sefer HaChinuch, you have to be so careful what you say for 2 reasons. He doesn't have a support system, and he doesn't have, and we never want him to go away. V'amu b'sifra, and it says in the Sifra, in the writings of our rabbis, Shelo tomar lo emesh hayita oved avodah zara. Oh yeah, yesterday you served idols. V'achshav nichnas tachת v'ayra. Today you want to tell me how religious I am? This happens. Even people who become observant, there are people who, Rashayim, evil people, they go, oh yeah, I remember when you didn't keep kosher. What does it help to tell somebody that? What does it help? Today they're not that person anymore. So why you remind them of the past? Only to hurt them. And there's no good reason to remind them of the past. It's a sad thing to the Jewish community. People today we're afraid to tell people where we come from, or what the things we've gone through. Instead of it looking upon like, wow, look at you. Look how impressive it is that you went through all that and look who you are today. Today people look at it like, oh, this person, look at all the bad things they did. That's not the way the Torah works. Hashem doesn't run a world like that. There's tshuva. Tshuva is a beautiful thing to be able to change around your life. This happens in the world of shidduchim. I was at somebody's house. A very religious family, supposedly. And they were asking my wife and I, it's so amazing to us. You got married, an Ashkenazi woman and a Sephardic guy, and this. Okay. And the guy kept pushing the topic, like, tell me your story, there must be a story. So we told him the story, and we told him that it was hard. Not everyone in the family was so excited about this match. And he's like, oh, that's so terrible. And I saw his daughter at the end of the table. And she's shaking her head. He says, yeah, what's wrong with you? What he tells her. She says, yes, like Dad, as if you would let one of us marry a Sephardic guy. And he turned red, and I'm sitting at his table.
How old was the girl?
20 years old.
Okay.
Sits at the table, and he bangs his fist down. He says, I would never let my daughter marry someone Sephardic.
And you're right there.
And then looks at me, I'm sitting right here where Eli's sitting. And he says, please don't take it personally,
Nothing personal.
Nothing personal, right? Nothing. And I was such a sad moment for me because it was absurd, this whole thing. But I guess these things still exist in the world today.
How did your wife react?
My wife, she was very upset the whole Shabbat. I thought it was the funniest thing. I mean, the guy, clearly he didn't think. Here he was at the table, he would say, oh, I have a guest of honor, I have a rabbi here, da-da-da-da. And then all of a sudden, oh, he's Sephardic. I would never let my daughter marry him. So I always wanted to say, so during the meal, he was quoting Maimonides, the Rambam, he quoted the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, Rabbi Chaim Ibn Attar. So I wanted, they're all Sephardic rabbis he quoted, but he would never let his daughter marry any of them, right? That was okay, such people that exist in the world. So in the world of dating, shidduchim, there's a thing, you want to get a person with the least amount of flaws possible. It's a big flaw in someone who was divorced. She was married once, she's divorced, a flaw. There's a rabbi in Israel, in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Shlomo Aviner. He wrote a whole article on the plus of marrying a girl who was divorced. And he went through hell and back for writing this article. And he said something very simple. He said, you're so quick, oh, she must be damaged. He said, you know what it's like? A person who went through a divorce and they're still standing today. And they're still proud of who they are. And they're not broken. And they're ready to get married again. They're ready to give it a second shot. He's like, you're not marrying someone who's damaged. You're marrying a warrior. That's what he wrote. Yeah. That was the article. He used those words. You're marrying a warrior.
The damage means he doesn't remain single for 50 years.
Very nice. Thank you.
That's the problem.
So what he says here was very special. You're looking at the wrong side of the coin. But that's what happens. What happens when people don't look at the world through the lens of Hashem. They look at the world through the lens of people on the street. We're not supposed to learn Torah from the people on the street. We're supposed to learn Torah from the one who gave us the Torah. And the same thing here, the converts. But Hashem is saying, look what this person had to go through to reach where they reached. You should be very proud of such a person. Look at our Siddur.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, well, Hashem, look at the Siddur, for example. The Siddur we ask that Hashem should give us a blessing that we should be as holy, al ha-tzadikim, like the righteous people, al ha-chasidim, like not the guys with the fuzzy heads. Chasidim means
Pious people.
the pious people, Val Ziknei Amcha Bet Yisrael, and put us in the category of the elders of the Jewish people, very noble people, V'al Gerei HaTzedek, and also allow us to be in the category of the righteous converts to Judaism. And in our prayer book, it's put in there that you have 4 categories of holy people: Tzadikim, Chasidim, Zkenim, and Gerei HaTzedek, Gerim. And people say this with their mouth, but they don't think about it in their head. It's a very big value to see somebody who's so strong they reach where they reach today. And the Torah is saying you have to knock this into people's heads because they don't get it. I was walking home with somebody once, and there was an Israeli couple that was with me. The Israelis, for some reason, I guess in Israel there are so many Jews, you don't very much meet people who converted to Judaism. It's something you see a lot outside of Israel. Who's going to convert? Muhammad is going to come convert. It happens sometimes. There are Muslims who convert to Judaism, but it's not so simple in Israel that Muslims are converting to Judaism. Actually, it's an interesting thing. The Chidah writes that according to Kabbalah, Christians, or people from Christian nations, convert to Judaism much more than any other nation in the world. And he has a whole thing according to Kabbalah, where Yishmael comes from, where Esav comes from, and why Esav is trying to come back always to his father. Yishmael is not trying to come back to his father. It's an interesting Kabbalistic approach. But you'll see, really, in the majority of the world where we have converts, mostly people that came from countries where Christianity was the belief system. Not always. There's no rule to anything in the world. But they came here, and they were walking with me back from Shul, and they turned to the person I was walking with and said, so are you real Jewish, or you're not real Jewish? I got so angry at this person. And the person was a convert who was walking with me. How do you talk to a person like that? What are you? Where do you come from? What planet do you come from? But there are people that just, their mouth, they don't have a filter between their head and their mouth. Someone once diagnosed it, forgive me for these words, I'm in a synagogue. They said it's called mental constipation and verbal diarrhea. It's a thing that people have in their head. Unfortunately, some people don't know how to, and it doesn't mean they're allowed to think it, but it's one thing if you think something, don't say it. You don't have to say it, there's like a whole, there's some people, the Kotzker Rebbe once said, not everything you think, you have to say. Not everything you say, you have to write. Not everything you write, you have to publish. Sometimes you just, things are best kept inside. So let's just finish this mitzvah. And then he says, "V'noheget b'chol." This is the last two sentences. "V'noheget b'chol makom u'b'chol zman." And this mitzvah applies in every place in the world, Israel and outside of Israel. U'b'chol zman, every time. What does it mean every time period? Whether we have
Mashiach or not.
very nice, a Beit Mikdash or not, a temple or not. Bischarim, to men, it says ger in masculine, but also to nekevot, to female converts. There's no difference. And now you'll notice why I had to do this before we say mitzvah number 65, Samachet. Hashem says that you cannot oppress a widow or an orphan. But you cannot oppress anybody. So now everything you know from a convert apply here. Why not a widow? Or why does it have to add another mitzvah? What do we know about the convert? He's lacking a family, a support system. A widow and an orphan, it's the same kind of person. Sure, she has something, maybe she has kids, but it's not a support system. And therefore, this person is lacking already in her frame of support and her ability to get over certain things. An orphan comes to school, he's not like all other kids. The kids talk about their parents, his parents' day, he doesn't have anyone to bring inside. This is something you have to think about. And therefore Hashem says an extra level of care. The worst curses in the Torah, if you look at all, take a pencil, circle every punishment in the Torah, the worst curses are given to somebody who oppresses a widow and an orphan. And the Sefer HaChinuch tells us that it's not just about a widow and an orphan, it's about any person in the world who falls into this category. That at that moment they're weak, that at that moment they don't have support, that at that moment they're vulnerable. Anybody in that situation falls into this category of widow or orphan. So why does the Torah mention a widow or orphan?
The widow, sometimes they get married again, widow.
Oh, so she's no longer in that category, okay. But tell me one thing, why doesn't it just say then to anybody who's vulnerable? Why does it choose widow and orphan?
Like example.
Very nice. Very often the Torah will say something as an example. It's trying to drive home a point. The Torah is saying like a widow and orphan. Not only a widow and orphan. It could be that it's a widower. It could be that it's a man. There's no rule here.
Divorced woman.
Of course, a divorced person, a woman she lost everything she has right now. Somebody could be people that are married and they're bankrupted. Any person in a vulnerable situation. But the Torah is choosing a situation where, especially, not just are they vulnerable, but it's people that nobody else is coming to help them. It's the kind of people that end up always in the bottom of the food chart, of the what do they call it, the bottom of the food chain. It's not somebody who's so wealthy that everyone wants to bring to the top. It's not the wife of a big, tzaddik or billionaire that everyone wants to bring. It's just somebody, just another person. There's a famous rabbi that when he would collect money for poor people, he would always collect in the winter. They should have wood to burn in their stoves. So whenever he would go door to door to collect for these poor families, he would never go into the people's house to collect. He would always stand in the doorway and talk to them, give them a Dvar Torah, give them this. He said, Rabbi, why do you come inside the house to drink? It's freezing cold outside. He wouldn't answer the question. He would wait, and when the person would give just a little bit, he would say, yeah, you see how cold it is right now? I've been skipping outside for 30 minutes. Can you imagine sleeping in this weather tonight? So that's all you're going to give? And he would always get people to... I just read now a story about a rabbi who passed away, but he would always, when he would go to a fundraising dinner for widows and orphans, people that didn't have food at home, he would never eat that day. He would always fast that day. That's right. Come on, that's ridiculous. And at the meal, he wouldn't eat either. At the dinner, he says, "Cause I have to feel what it's like for a person who didn't eat. That's what I want. I want to experience that. That way, I'll be able to give better. It's easy for me sitting in my slippers and my robe, sitting on my bed with the heat on. It's easy to write out a check for $18. But when I really understand what it's like, so then I'm going to be much more generous. Hashem demands this from us. It's a certain level of really putting yourself in other people's shoes. So the last question for tonight, the last little bit here, before he finishes the chapter, he asks one question. So what about a rabbi to his students, or a teacher to her students? Are they allowed to... Sometimes, teachers push kids. Not to be mean, but to push them. Kid didn't do his homework. She's not allowed to get angry at him because he's an orphan? The rabbi, the kid's disrespectful to the rabbi. They can't say anything?
Actually, yes, he should, because otherwise he's treating the convert or the orphan different than the rest.
Interesting. That's an interesting point, but you hear what he said? You also, nobody wants to be singled out as the they say in the Nebuch case. You don't want to be the pity case. You want to... That's one thing. Two, you still have to do your job as an educator. You're never supposed to humiliate anybody. You should do it with the kids' gloves. Be nice. But at the end of the day, your job as an educator is to make sure that this person gets an education. And if that's what needs to be done, so you have to say, I know that there's a mitzvah. I'm treating them like I would another kid, but I still have to do things. This is l'to'elet. It's for the good of this child. There is such a thing in the world. But it has to be done very, very, very gently, and then the mechatma is more gentle than anybody else in the world. So, with that, I think that we can wrap up tonight. But the person has to know that this mitzvah applies everywhere, to every kind of person. In our life, we will meet all kinds of people. Just now, we met somebody, and I gave her tzedakah. Do they need? Do they not need? I once asked my rabbi, I have parents. I said, parents, how do I know if a person needs tzedakah or not? He said, what are you going to do? You're going to go check their bank account? You're going to open up their wallet? What are you going to do? I said, if a person puts themselves in a situation where they're asking for something,
They need it.
he said, they need it. He said, even if they don't need money, but they're asking for money, he says they need chesed. They need somebody to give. Maybe they need to see that someone cares about them. Maybe...
The big rabbi written about this. Don't ask all these things. Give the money.
Yeah, right. So listen, someone says, but they're going to use it for drugs, they're going to use it for this. Listen, if you know that someone's a drug addict and they only use their money for drugs, you have to ask your rabbi a question. But just to say, because he's homeless and he's going to use it for drugs, it's not necessarily true. And so I'll give you a better thing. So don't give him money. Get out of your car, park your car, walk over to him. I once did this in New York. Somebody asked me for money. I didn't know who he was and what he was, and he told me he was out of jail and he was in a halfway house and the whole thing. And the story was a little bit interesting to me. So I didn't want to give him money. I said, what do you need money for? She said, I just need to buy some soap to take a shower today. I said, okay, there's a CVS here. Why don't we go together to CVS? You don't buy soap, buy everything that you need for the next week. I said, just everything, food, whatever you need. And he came back with cereal, with milk, with some bananas, with soap, with shampoo, with a sponge, things, basic things that people need. Yeah. And I paid for it. No, that cost us, $50. And if I could do it, I promise you a lot of other people in the world could give it to the guy. That person said, no, so you don't have to give money, so don't give money. It's not an excuse not to give, it's just an excuse not to give money. So find somewhere else. There are people, Hashem put us in the world to help other people. And the whole beauty of this mitzvah, these two mitzvot, it's not talking about money. It's not talking about anything physical. It's talking about your mouth, with your words, with your hearts, with your thoughts, to really know how to give other people the love that they really need, the respect that they really need, the space that they really need. Because Hashem, if we do this to other people, I promise you that Hashem treats us the same way that we treat other people. KSH Kollel learning tonight.